All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Two Men in Black and White, an honest conversation. Ladies and gentlemen, the dog finally caught the car. The cat is out of the bag. What did he know and when did he know it? Now we know when he knew and who told him exactly what he knew. Also, ladies and gentlemen, the Epstein lawyer who got him that sweetheart deal down in West Palm Beach suddenly dies overnight. How about that for an explosive and incredibly enlightening day in the saga of the Trumpstein files? Ladies and gentlemen, we are back, and it's the story he can't get away from. I'm joined by my partner in crime, senior political analyst, Brock Ganellis joins us now with some insight. Brock, I told you he's boxed in.
How'd that lawyer die? Did he jump out of a fifth story window in Moscow? How did he have his demise?
Well, it wasn't that egregious. You know, the guy's 80.
Okay.
Could have been natural causes, but we'll have to wait and see. I just thought it was incredibly ironic.
Yeah, timing,
right? This is the second untimely death. 80 is a little more timely than Virginia Giuffre, who committed suicide just a few weeks ago. But now we've got these Epstein players, Ghislaine Maxwell now fearing for her life. And Trump's old defense attorney, who's now the deputy AG, is now headed to Tallahassee to talk to her. And what's he going to talk to her about?
Yeah, that's a shakedown.
Shouldn't he be recusing himself? I mean, in like a normal planet Earth investigation, wouldn't he recuse himself because he was maybe a little too close to the investigation?
One would think, but look, it's a different DOJ, right? This is 2025 DOJ. But okay, so the Wall Street Journal is just going to torture Trump by trickling out a story a day, right? So they come with the Pam Bondi story that Bondi told Trump in May that he was in the Epstein files. But come on, Mark. Trump knew he was in the Epstein files. He didn't need that meeting with Pam Bondi to tell him. I just wonder, I'm curious what the discussion was after Bondi told Trump. What else was talked about in that room? Was it like, well, you better not let this fucking thing ever get out? What threat, implicit threat was made from Trump to Pam Bondi?
There was a threat.
Yeah, okay, so we know he knew, but like that, only the craziest of the crazies didn't think Trump realized that he was in these Epstein files. So, okay. So now he's in it. Supposedly he's enraged and storming around the Oval Office, and they don't know, as if we care about his mood at this point. Right. So yeah, and he accused, now he's up the ante on Obama, right? So Obama now has been accused of which is punishment. That was the Obama team right now calling, just to make sure I message this properly. But he has been accused of treason. Michelle, I'll call you back. Accused of treason. Treason, which is punishable by death, right? So, they went straight for treason. Yep. That's where the DOJ is supposed to focus, right? And that's where Tulsi Gabbard is out, saying she has evidence of some bullshit. I mean, I haven't watched any of her press conferences because I can't do it. But,
He's got nothing. He's got no reputable facts, right? Everybody agrees on the basics that Russia interfered with the 2016 election. They weren't able to change any votes, is what the intelligence community had agreed on. So now you're telling me that Obama and his team had the infinite wisdom to project ahead to 2025, falsify files from Epstein implicating Trump in a pedophile ring? Are you kidding me? That's what we're supposed to hang our hats on? Dude, get out of here. It's ridiculous. It's strange credulity. I mean, come on, Trump. Even for you, that's a bridge too far even for Trump. It makes no sense. You can't even follow it in a straight line. Doesn't even make sense. On top of that, Brock, what are we really litigating Russia for? Russia. Why are we going back in time? 10 years.
I mean, he's trying to divert attention, but I think the basic fact now, after a week of this story just being the dominant headline in America, is that no one's buying what Trump's selling, right? His path for maybe the first time in his life. No one at all, even his supporters, aren't buying his story, right? Mike Johnson had to shut down Congress because he couldn't buy the story and he couldn't let the story play out in Congress. So he just shut it down because in his heart, he can't buy it because, like you said, the logic doesn't take you anywhere that makes sense, right? Nope. So like none of it makes sense. So he's just boxed in, getting enraged and coming out with more fantastical lies. Yeah. So it's just going to be interesting to watch. Having said all that, like the MAGA support of the politicians stays pretty lockstep, except for Massey in Kentucky. Right. I mean, James Comer is playing around with subpoenaing Maxwell, but he may be in cahoots. They may be like doctoring Maxwell's testimony. You know, talk about someone who's going to be under duress, right? Ooh. She'll basically be in there with a gun at the back of her head. She said the wrong thing. She ain't going to last 10 minutes outside the halls of Congress. So, okay, so Trump's got problems. He's underwater. His polling numbers are in free fall.
Which is great news, especially for him because we know how vain he is and how much he needs that external approval for his own psyche and his own ego. They probably ought to keep the burgers and ketchup away from him because there's going to be a lot of that stuff flying off the walls in the White House dining room. But who cares, right? At this point, we could care less. It's just interesting to me that Ghislaine is now fearing for her life. Apparently, some of her family members are speaking out on her behalf. I do believe that Ghislaine Maxwell's family would probably be the place where some of this information is coming from. Some of these stories are coming from, especially that birthday album. You know, I mean, just imagine what Ghislaine had in her little New Hampshire hideaway up there in the mountains, right? All the Epstein memorabilia, right? The pictures, right? Travel logs, credit card receipts, right? All the business. Her family probably has custody of that stuff, right? You know, they moved her out or it's in some storage unit somewhere, right? Up there in New Hampshire or wherever her little getaway was. And that stuff's got to come out. And Rupert Murdoch says, I'm here for it. Because now Trump is being implicated with having gone to Murdoch and gotten Murdoch's insurances that he was going to spike the story. He went to Murdoch to say, kill this story. Don't let it out. I'm talking about the birthday album, birthday photo album, picture album, pubic hair signature album. So that would, now Brock, think about what kind of crazy times we're living in. That in itself would have been a scandal worthy of possible resignation if we were in normal American times, right? Instead, it's like the third page in another insidious report on Trump's involvement in a pedophile ring. How crazy. The end is near. I'm just going to let you know, the end is near.
Why do you think the end is near?
Because there's nowhere for him to go with this. You don't release it. QAnon, Bannon, Megyn Kelly, Stuart Rhodes, the whole ecosystem of, MAGA influencers and QAnon influencers goes nuts, And look, they've forgiven him for every other thing. Why wouldn't they forgive him for this? I'm just saying. There's no way out.
Okay, so I think they bury it. It never comes out. Trump stares down Bannon, Megyn Kelly, and all these other jokers. Trump knows his approval now has tanked and is unrecoverable, which means he can never allow another election. So he just starts playing the long game. That's why he's on the election interference front, because he's just now going to try to discredit American elections so that he can argue that there can never be another fair one. Therefore, we should never have another one. And that's how he's going to try to ride through this. And he thinks that where's Bannon going to go? Where's Bannon going? Is Bannon going to jump on the Gavin Newsom bandwagon? Is Megyn Kelly going to get on the Pritzker bandwagon? Like, these people have nowhere to go. So I think he's just going to play election fraud and just, we'll never see the Epstein file. That's my thought. I think he's just going to have to punt on elections because he can't win another one now. At this point now with the approval, he can't win independents like that. So that ship has sailed. And the question is, will he allow a midterm election, which could undermine, which would undermine his control of Congress? Will he even allow that? Or will he trial balloon canceling elections in the midterm to see how it plays and how he has to then manipulate his propaganda messaging so that he can cancel the presidential election, which is really the only one he cares about. So that's what I'm thinking. Is this going to come out? I mean, the story won't go away, but Trump will, he's a survivor. He's going to navigate around it, and he's just going to lie his way through it and try to convince the entire American public and the world that there's a different reality.
Right. Well, how long until some Trump appointed or some Obama appointed judge, says, you know what, screw this. I'm releasing the grand jury testimony. Here it is, all of it, all 450 megabytes. Have at it, right? Because once the grand jury testimony comes out, I mean, it's a dead dog. I mean, all in there.
At least half the story's in there. But
yeah,
I still can't believe it hasn't leaked. So I think
I know
that's the one thing that'll happen. There's just a high likelihood at some point there's going to be a leak. There just needs to be a secure channel. But if Murdoch's on it, but even Murdoch's behavior is odd, right? The Wall Street Journal is like a pit bull on the story and is tormenting Trump.
Yep.
But that's not what Fox News is doing. And Murdoch owns both properties. Like, News was talking Obama today. They're not talking Epstein. He's just playing like just one piece of the puzzle, right? But he can go flip that switch on Fox News at any time he wants, and then maybe that's the inherent threat that he's dangling over Trump. That if nothing else, he's just going to embarrass him into submission, and that's where Trump might implode along the way, right? He's not going to be able to handle this mentally.
And Murdoch has said that before, that he's wanted to embarrass Trump. I mean, that's been reported before. And what's interesting is Murdoch doesn't care because he's still making money, hand over fist. Guy is making a shit ton of money, and again, that's all they care. It doesn't matter what the economy does, right? The economy is so bad right now, Hershey's is raising their prices on chocolate bars because of the price of cocoa. That's how bad the economy is right now. That's how bad it is. I mean, it's awful, and nobody's even talking about it, right? Because we can't get away from the Trumpstein files. So, I mean, if we were talking about the economy, and again, I think you hit on a big point. This is the first time he's not been able to bullshit his way out of something, right? Because at every corner, he's boxed in, right? He can't explain it away, right? We got video of him and Epstein partying with young girls. People have seen the pictures, right? People have been to Lolita on the Lolita Express. His name's in the flight logs, his name's, everywhere. Witness accounts of him being gross and ogling little girls. I mean, it's just, and then we got a credible rape allegation by a 13-year-old, right? So, I mean, there's no way for him to get away from the QAnon crazies on this one, right? Without coming out and saying, hey, even a full mea culpa is not going to work.
No, and he would never do that. He'll die before he does a full mea culpa. But he lost the QAnon shaman, however you pronounce that word, shaman. Remember that guy? Remember the guy trooping through the
horns?
Yeah, the horns. That guy was out calling Trump a piece of shit today. Even the QAnon shaman has now turned on Trump. Yeah. So he is losing the QAnon crazies, but that's why there'll never be another election.
Wow, that's the guy who needed the vegetarian diet.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, he appealed to the judges. He needed a different diet in his 3 months doing hard time for insurrection. He needed a vegan diet during his 3 months of insurrection time.
Yeah, right.
Well, if we were talking about the economy, we have to talk about absurd stories like how Japan, that was supposedly, bent over with terrible tariffs, we figured out that Toyota is going to get an advantage over U.S. car makers because U.S. car makers have to deal with steel and copper tariffs at 50%. And all the other tariffs of the components that go into the cars. So U.S. car makers are screwed. So Toyota, that only has to pay that one 15 or 19% tariff, has a massive price advantage now on U.S. car makers because the tariffs totally backfire on our own manufacturing. U.S. car makers now are starting to lose money, lose market share, and are going to have to cut U.S. manufacturing, which is supposedly the exact opposite of the whole point of the tariffs. But no one thought it through for more than 5 seconds, right?
Because your boy is bringing manufacturing back to America. That's what your boy is doing. Wow, he has no idea how tariffs work. He still doesn't know how they work.
No, he doesn't know how percentages work either, because he's going to bring some. He was saying I was going to bring something down 1,000%, and it was, and, someone did the math and calculated. Oh, so he's going to pay us to do this now because it's that was drug prices. Well, we're going to get paid because he's going to bring drug prices down 1,000%. So like one guy tweeted out, it's like, oh, so I'm going to get paid to take the drugs going forward. But none of the math works.
Math ain't mathing at all. God, he's an idiot. I mean, and if we couldn't laugh about it, we'd be crying, because it is so sad that this country has fallen so far. Like you said the other night, there's no way any other advanced nation on this planet would allow itself to fall this far. From the heights that we were once at just a short time ago with Joe Biden and President Biden and President Obama. And, it's just ridiculous that we've fallen this far at the hands of a D- student who doesn't understand any of how the government works. All he's doing is trying to enrich himself. And, that's the bottom line. And all these zealots that he's got behind him, are basically just using him as the figurehead. He's their useful idiot. Just like Vladimir used him in 2016. He's the useful idiot. So, where we go from here is we'll wait for the Wall Street Journal or whoever comes out next, because how's he going to say fake news to the Wall Street Journal? I mean, now he defines fake news as anything that is derogatory about him. Doesn't matter where it comes from. It's all fake news if it's bad about me. It's great if it's about me and it's good, but it's all fake news if it's not. And his supporters haven't figured that out yet. But we'll wait for the next story. And as these, as the pins continue to drop, it's just going to come out in leaks and drabs. Next thing you know, we're going to get some personal accounts from these court documents, John Doe 174. And what kind of activity he partook in. We already heard a part of that story from Luther Campbell from the 2 Live crew. He didn't give us specifics, but he let us know that it was raunchy over there.
Well, yeah, the more stories are going to come out because the reporters now are going to be all over it and searching for informants, leaks, anyone who will talk at all, because they're seeing the public appetite for it is so immense. So this is where the eyeballs are. So this is where they're going to want to feed and keep piling onto the stories. And I think I listened to a couple, major pollsters today. One was a pollster polling, black voters. Another was primarily polling white voters. Didn't explicitly say that. And, both just pointed to how dramatically Trump's support has slipped in this first 6-7 months, right? Sure. And now, I mean, if the midterms were today, it would be a tsunami.
Right.
For the Democrats, even though they're not really in favor either. But it's like, and we're such a lesser of two evils world, but Trump is an absolute anchor now on the party, yet the politicians are still afraid of being primaried by that small sliver of Republican voters in primaries, that they're all still in lockstep.
Yeah. Toxic selfishness. Nobody willing to stand up and take a stand and fight the power, speak truth to power, and in that polling, you talk about young people, they're saying 60% of young people who graduated within the last year are still looking for that first gig, still looking for their first job, a year later, and I guarantee you a huge swath of that 60% are black and brown kids, right, who don't have hookups in corporate America, who don't have parents that are well connected, who don't have parents who can just write a check, for grad school, or for med school, or for law school, just because I don't feel like looking for a job.
It's interesting we haven't seen that in the numbers yet. I mean, of course we have to question the numbers we're seeing from the government, but we haven't seen that like in the unemployment numbers yet. Right. But it feels like it's looming out there. So one of the pollsters I saw was on the Roland Martin show. Mm-hmm. Yep. And it was primarily a poll of just black voters. So I'm really interested in your sort of comments coming off of what the conclusions were from the pollsters. I think it was Cornell Belcher's team, but it was a woman who maybe works with him that was really the main voice on the show with Roland Martin's panel. And she was saying that, number one, younger black Americans are drifting away from the Democratic Party, really to no party. No party serves them in their mind right now. So they kind of view themselves independent, not so much that they would vote Republican, but their propensity to just not turn out is much higher. And there was a sense that the mainstream media has totally missed the mark on what Black America cares about, because there's such a focus on economics and the pocketbook issues being like the number one thing, and that is not as showing up in the answers they're getting from the Black Americans polled, who basically have 10 different issues, almost like of equal weight. The erasure of Black history, the fact that education is declined, voting rights, something taken granted forever. People are worried about whether they're going to be able to vote. ICE deportations and just the whole way ICE is acting. Of course, a certain increasing solidarity with Latinos but of course now a fear that Black people will be next. Like just this long list of, in essence, equivalent issues. And that, sort of mainstream media totally overblows how, economics driving the thought process, particularly for younger people. It's affordability, that's one of many factors. I don't know where you stand, what you hear from your friends who would be considered to be by the way, sorry to say, a much older demographic, certainly, and people your age more likely to identify as Democrats. Absolutely. Versus someone 30 years younger, maybe your son. Maybe you can talk to that.
Absolutely, because Brock, think about it. When we were coming out of college, the late 80s, early 90s, Bill Clinton. Remember Bill Clinton? Everybody gets a home, right? We had the dot-com boom, right? There was money everywhere, right? People were getting jobs. People were happy. Everybody had their SUVs and their, house with the picket fence, a couple of kids, maybe throw in a third one if you're feeling lucky. And it was all good. We could relate to those 8 years after a difficult 1980s where we saw double-digit mortgage rates and heard our parents complaining about how expensive, the mortgage interest was. Bill Clinton showed up and embraced Black folks. We considered Bill Clinton the first Black president because we never thought we'd see one in our lifetime. So, that was a lot of the allure for the Democratic Party. Also, what happened in that time and what young people have now realized is that during that whole 90s time, Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton, Joe Biden had all clashed leading up to the 2016 election with young Black voters over the crime bill. Remember the crime bill, which came into prominence in 91? We had Hillary's infamous comment.
Predators, right? Was it Predators comment?
Yes. And then we saw the prison population shoot up astronomically. It went from like 700,000 to 2.3 million, which is where it is now. So it was just absolutely ridiculous. The private prison business took off, and it has remained flat.
Yeah. Then Reagan came in with the war on drugs.
Yes, indeed. So, they have equated that with the Democratic Party, and then no one's addressing the other issues that are important to them. And a couple of them you mentioned, voting rights, the erasure of Black history, right? A lot of these kids are coming out of HBCUs. Now they're making it even more difficult for you to borrow money. It's already difficult for you to get your first gig, right? A lot of Black kids now are coming out of college and saying, hey, how do I start my own business? I didn't know any African Americans. I knew 2 African Americans that owned their own businesses, right? A neighbor and one of my father's fraternity brothers. Those were the only people I knew with businesses, so I didn't see that growing up, right? But now, the influencer business, the social media business, right, is allowing people to make some money. Now, not a lot of people are making money, right? As again, the top 1-2% are getting paid. Everybody else is trying to get there. Right. And so, it's a different day. And the reason why the mainstream media is missing what's important to African Americans is because they don't have any African American leadership. They don't have any African Americans in positions of power. You rarely see general managers, general sales managers, executives in people of color in these large mainstream network television groups. And that's why when the research comes back, we're not playing to what's important to black folks because they're really not care because they really don't care because it's about making money, right? And so who's watching the most television, right? That's all they care about in their particular markets, right? And black people watch more TV than anybody, right? We spend more than anyone. Like our consumer spending is through the roof.
Well, the part of the thesis today, though, was that so much of the younger eyeballs have moved to online, YouTube being the biggest channel and all that, and that the right dominates the podcast world, Joe Rogan, but go down, they just went down the list of all, and that the propaganda, that young black people got flooded with propaganda, even on the left-wing podcast, the advertising is like right-wing messaging, that there was a lot, they just got flooded with propagandas, particularly headed up into the last election, and the left has just gotten crushed on this front. And that's why a lot of like the BS made its way in. That's why Trump's whole story that he was going to bring down prices and that, these immigrants are infesting the country, like work their way in. And that, Roland Martin's message is like, there's no black-owned media. There's no stories about black people in the mainstream media. We need, quote, we need to build our own ecosystem, which he's trying to do. But he's one person, and they're just getting crushed. Yeah, he's trying to climb a mountain. He's just absolutely getting crushed. So it's not even just the television world, which has declining ratings, but it's, we definitely white corporate owned, but it's even in the online world. So I don't know, how you feel about that. Or how does that change? Because even Roland Martin's show was all black people on it. Then I watched this other podcast with Molly Jan Fast, and she had a different pollster on there, and there were a bunch of white people talking, and per usual, it was two siloed, discussions going on. I watched them both today just to see if they were even going to be in the same universe, and
not even in the same ballpark.
They barely even crossed in terms of what was being discussed at all.
Rock, in the mid-90s, I was working in Denver, Colorado, and one of the research firms had done some research and looked at the 10 most popular shows in black and white households. The only show that was in both top 10s, Monday Night Football. The only show. Now, there's 9 other shows that neither of us are watching from side to side, right? So that tells you how far apart we are. Our interests are totally different. And then we don't talk to each other, right? The only time most of my African-American counterparts talk to white folks is at work, right? That's the only time they see them. They didn't grow up with them. They don't know them. They don't understand them. And they don't try to form relationships with them. And when you speak to Southern African-American counterparts, they're even less likely to know white people. Because in the South, things are so separate, right? Like up in the North, you'd find pockets where you have African, right? Peekskill, Poughkeepsie, Ossining, White Plains, right? That's Westchester County, which is one of the most expensive counties in the country. And you would still find pockets of African Americans. Now that's changed since we've grown up, but we were there. When we would see each other, we would play on basketball teams together. We'd play in rec leagues together. It would not be strange to come across white or black folks in New York during the course of the business day or the course of the school week or the course of our athletic activities. So it wasn't that strange. But, in the South, I was shocked when I moved down here in 91 to Albany, Georgia, at how separate everything was. I was working in little Albany, Georgia, about 30 minutes away from Plains, Georgia, Jimmy Carter's hometown. And man, as soon as you left Albany city limits, it was a totally different story. City was all black. The surrounding rural area was all white. Then by the time you got up to Cordele, you was in the watermelon capital of the world, and those farms were owned by white folks. So, it was very, very different. And, we were privileged. I think we were privileged to grow up together in a community where we could learn about each other and respect one another and maintain friendships like ours. You remember I hung out with the majority of white kids when I was in high school. My main group of friends. Except for on the sports teams, we're all white kids, and our basketball team, but the 9 of us hung out on a regular basis. It was a mixed crew, and so and we never talked about it. Like I would, you know, aside from one comment from a coach, like we hardly ever talked about it.
I know. Maybe we should have.
Yeah.
You know? I don't know. Probably should have. We just didn't know better.
Yeah.
Or just didn't matter. It just washed over us. I don't know.
Yeah, but race is always going to be a factor. And it's interesting because I was waiting for Trump to blame the Epstein files on a DEI hire, but he hasn't done that yet.
We can't find one, right? I mean, they fired everyone. I mean, it's got to be white on white violence because that's the only people that are left roaming around there. But where do you stand? I mean, I think you listen to Roland Martin. I think you said that you're like sort of a fan of his. Like, I mean, is it happening? Is the black community developing their own networks or getting some independent media helping, or just the money's not flowing?
We don't have the money to set up the kind of podcast you'll see the Kelsey family with, right? They got $100 million deal. You don't see any. Well, you saw Shannon Sharp get one, but he messed it up. You know.
Yeah. He's still a top 20er. Club Shay Shay is still a top 20 podcast.
But it's not a politically.
Well, that's what he said. Top 50. All the black-led shows in on YouTube and this and that. That was Roland Martin pointed that out. All entertainment oriented, not whether it's that guy like a Rick Smiley that he mentioned today, like that, who may dabble in politics, but they're not political shows. Versus on the right, overt political shows. Yeah, directly Ben Shapiro's and I mean I guess
Joe
Rogan's quasi-political, but then there's a whole Bannon, there's a whole list of others,
and that are well funded. Right? And you look at them, they got production value. You know, they say it's not expensive to put on a podcast, and we know that it isn't, right? But, you know, once you get some money behind you, right? Now you got marketing teams, you've got, you know, advertising money that you can use to advertise and suck viewers in. You can take your show on the road. They go to Turning Point. They go to all these different places, and they've got like a whole press row, a podcast row of, you know, Charlie Kirk and all these influencers, right, that are all set up back there to do interviews and to promote, you know, the right-wing agenda. And it happens because they have money. You don't see Roland on the road. You know, he comes to the Black Journalist Conference, but he doesn't have the kind of money.
We talked about it today. He had to spend $70,000 on a new lighting system, and he had to spend like another $30,000 on upgrading their IT because he's trying to up the production value because he's trying to, in essence, develop a network where it's also not just his show. He's trying to, you know, develop, you know, a cadre of other, you know, performers or producers, basically.
Right.
And you know, it's uphill battle, right? I mean, I feel like he's doing a pretty good job of it, but him and Don Lennon and now Joy Reid are kind of the three that I maybe traffic in the most.
Right, but where are they going to get the money, you know, to be able to compete against Megyn Kelly, to be able to compete against Steve Bannon, and some of these right-wing megaphones that are out there that are literally moving the needle for Trump and the right-wing agenda, for the hate-mongering. That's what they do, and that's why people buy into it, because they're hearing it so often.